Well, here we are, still on the 2020 roller coaster. As Melissa and I put together the order of service at the beginning of this week, we didn't know quite what to plan for today. She consulted a colleague that offered some very sage advice. He said, "The work of people of faith remains constant." The work of people of faith remains constant. That's such a helpful reminder to me. Yes, this has been an important election, but as a faith community, we still go about our business, building beloved community, opening hearts and minds, deepening connections, and caring for our neighbors. Nothing that happens in Washington is going to stop us from doing that. And nothing that happens in Washington can finish this essential job that is ours. Who sits in the Oval Office is important. And this year, the election of Kamala Harris as vice president is truly groundbreaking. That was not determined in 1 week or by one great qualified person, though. It's a long and winding journey that we undertook together as a nation. Too often, we look at history as an orderly, obvious chart of great leaders, typically men, achieving singular great deeds, a lot of them violent. One after another in a clear line of succession as countries are shaped, economies are built, scientific achievement is made. Well, several of us recently read a book by Rebecca Solnit where she challenges this outdated and simple version of history. She points out that the real lesson in history is that change often comes in unpredictable ways. Power can suddenly be in the hand of those who appear out of what seems to the rest of us like nowhere. But there's always a journey. One example she gives in the book is the rise of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I've heard several people wonder, where did this passionate, inspiring leader come from? She seems to just appear on the national stage from nowhere. Well, after her 2018 victory, AOC said, "I first started considering running for Congress actually at Standing Rock in North Dakota. It was really from the crucible of activism where I saw people putting their lives on the line for people they've never met and never known. When I saw that, I knew I had to do something more." Now, if we take another step back, we have to recognize that those camps at Standing Rock didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were carefully planned and ushered into being. In 2016, when some indigenous activists launched those camps and the protests for the Dakota Access Pipeline, they couldn't have dreamed of some of the consequences of their actions. Their efforts prompted a young woman of color from New York City to run for office. In turn, giving voice to the Green New Deal, Black Lives Matter, and other movements for sustainable justice. This not completely random, but not linear either, story is how history is made. Smaller actions, seemingly unrelated, build power and momentum. Even in rulings from the Supreme Court, those massive legal changes that seem to be handed down from on high often come from a result of broader cultural shift. It's definitely true in the case of same-sex marriage or abortion rights. Those legal shifts were made possible by countless unrecognized efforts to move forward together. Rebecca Solnit writes, positive social change results mostly from connecting more deeply to the people around you than rising above them, from coordinated effort rather than solo action. Among the virtues that matter are those traditionally considered feminine rather than masculine, more nerd than jock. Listening, respect, patience, negotiation, strategic planning, storytelling. And so, Tapestry, it is with our work. I hope those of you who have been involved in the election in even the smallest way understand that you are part of the journey of our nation. This moment brings to mind our UU ancestors who worked hard to contribute to the world that we enjoy today. Among them is James Luther Adams. He described a big part of our faith as having a prophetic imperative. It's a very odd saying. Based on our deep concern for justice and our commitment to seek truth together, Adams argued that we have a responsibility to speak our truth, like the prophets, even when it's unpopular, even when it's dangerous. Without diving into a full history lesson, it's worth saying that James Luther Adams studied theology in Germany because that's where the intellectual hotspot was at the time. And most of his thought and most of his writing emerged as a response to witnessing the rise of Nazi power in Germany while he was there. Adams drew on the ancient prophets of the Jewish and Christian heritage to explain how we could best live our faith. He took those biblical prophets really seriously. He talked about the risk involved. The prophets usually had a very, very unpopular message. None of the prophets chose their role. In fact, most of them tried really hard to get out of the duty of sharing that message. The other thing the prophets knew was that they were just messengers. They never lifted themselves up as heroes. The only power that they claimed was the power of the truth of their message. And finally, those prophets cast a large vision for social change. They didn't predict who was going to win the popular vote or the electoral college. They talked about a coming age that would be dramatically different from the current one. We talk a lot about speaking truth to power and doing the right thing. This week, I want to remind us of this last role of the prophet. It's good to celebrate marginal progress, but that doesn't absolve us from the prophetic imperative, the responsibility of holding a vision for a radically better future. A few years ago, I offered some of my vision for what our world might look like one day. I want to revisit that vision today. It still holds true, and there's still a whole lot of work to be done to build it. If we're to survive, we must find more sustainable ways of living. We must come to terms not with more efficient ways of living our lives, but with living our lives with less. I'm telling myself this as much as I'm telling you. The United States is actually one of the most efficient countries in the world. Still, we manage to consume so much that as a country, we're one of the biggest polluters. More technology and efficiency is not going to save us from ourselves. We're going to have to come to terms with living simpler lives. It's not a popular message, even for environmentally focused people. A real sustainable lifestyle, a lifestyle that has an impact that the earth can actually thrive with, is far beyond most of our imaginations and our daily habits. One day, though, We'll come to terms with the limits of the earth. It could be beautiful if we learn to share our resources, slow down a little bit. It won't be comfortable or easy, but it might be great. I believe that if we learn to live with less, we might survive the climate disaster that will change the course of human history. If we're to survive as a nation, then we must reinvent a functional democratic system that actually invites all citizens into decision making. Today, it seems that we're still tumbling into a political system defined by money. Our democracy has never been perfect. It was from the beginning limited by race, age, and even explicitly class. Maybe it's always been in a precarious position, but it seems to me that if we don't deal with the influence of money in politics, our democracy may go off the rails. Why not require transparency about where contributions come from? Why not have campaign finance reform? Why not have campaigns limited and financed by the government? Why not have politicians present their ideas on an equal stage so that people can listen and make thoughtful decisions? While we're at it, the Electoral College has got to go. And it's time to rethink a Senate that gives residents of Wyoming 70 times the amount of representation that it gives residents of California. That's not democracy, that's a rigged system. And this shouldn't sound like a far-fetched dream. If we as a country hope to maintain moral relevancy on a global stage, heck, if we hope to make good decisions about our future, we have to breathe new life into the ideal of representative democracy. And if we're to retain any sense of dignity as a nation, then one day we will assure that there is enough food, enough safe housing, enough health care for every person. It may not be luxurious or delicious, but here in the richest country in the history of the planet, it is an abomination for people to go hungry on the streets. If we hope to have any moral authority around the world, or even to be taken seriously, then we must manage to find enough. And that clearly is also an unpopular message because it means sharing. And if necessary, taking money from those who have way more than they know what to do with. Perhaps it sounds socialistic or un-American to some, but hopefully we can agree that sharing our resources is less un-American than children going hungry or our neighbors dying from exposure to the elements. One day there will be enough for all. I don't want to suggest that the 2020 election doesn't have consequences. The 2020 election will shape laws and the enforcement of laws that impact our health and the health of our planet. It'll support science and control of our own bodies and the building of world community. And there's also this tremendous symbolic consequence of the election. There's relief and the quantifiable proof that most of our neighbors choose science, multiculturalism, and affirmation of human worth and dignity. This principle of ours, though, affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person, is a tall order, a huge aspiration. It's the radical message that Jesus taught 2,000 years ago that still seems to fall on deaf ears. Attempting to live this one principle is a lifelong spiritual discipline, even for the most compassionate among us. It is as important today as it ever was. With unprecedented voter turnout this week, Joe Biden won the largest number of votes ever cast in a presidential election. Donald Trump won the second largest number of votes ever cast in a presidential election. It's time to celebrate, and to celebrate well. A rest and a breath of fresh air is absolutely necessary. The work of this community, the work of people of faith, remains constant. I am so glad to be with you in that work as we build the world that we dare to dream about, one small step at a time. Amen. It's the custom in our congregation to give half of our Sunday offerings to an organization that shares our values. This month, that organization is the California Fire Foundation. It supports firefighters and their families. And here in our neighborhood, we have so much to be grateful for their good, brave, and dangerous work. As we enjoy the gift of music, may you be moved to generosity.